Nita Harbeli Omer. Nita Harbeli had said, Harchik Mishochin Ro. Distance yourself from a bad neighbor. But don't attach yourself to an evil person. A bad neighbor is not a Russian necessarily, but he's not a good influence. A bad neighbor, keep your distance. But a Russia, you don't have to keep your distance, but just don't attach yourself to him. Don't get too intimate with him. Now you would think to the contrary. The person who represents something which is so extremely negative, you'd say, like see back of a hook and ladder fire engine, it says keep the distance 200 feet, and you have a red flag on the back, right? So somebody who's in Russia, you say, don't attach yourself to him. Don't be intimate. You say, keep your distance. Just stay away. A bad neighbor, he may not be perfect or far perfect, but you'd say, him, don't get too involved with, don't get too close to. But yet it says to the contrary. The bad neighbor, keep your distance. The evil person, you don't have to keep your distance, just don't attach yourself to him. How do we understand it? No, the Rambam writes, very famous Rambam in laws of behavior, we study this, that a person, there's no greater creation that's influenced by their environment other than a human being. Our environment and our social relationships has a tremendous effect on our being, on our perception, our perspectives, our behavior, many things. And the words of the chinuch are, Odom nifel k'fi pulosov. A man is a product of his actions. The way you behave, that's what you become. You do acts of righteousness, even if you're forced to do acts of righteousness, ultimately you become a righteous person. And a righteous person who's forced to do acts of evil, although it's something external, but that regiment of continuous evil behavior will turn the person even into an evil person. Because a person is a sum total of his actions. Therefore, the Rambam says, so what happens if you live in a community where the people are bad people and you're concerned you can be influenced? Rambam writes, even if you have to go into a cave and be all by yourself, because the alternatives, you can become an evil person, or go into a desert when nobody's there but yourself, that's what you have to do. Because you're not permitted to be in an environment where ultimately you can be changed to an evil person. Those are the words of Rambam. Now, a bad neighbor, you have to keep your distance. When we say bad, he's not really evil. But factually, because his negativity is so subtle and not obvious, you're more easily influenced by that person. Because it's not clear he is that. He's not a quality person, but he's not evil. He's not evil. So I see some positive aspects of his character. But the moment you see him in a positive light, it becomes a problem. Because he's not all evil. He's all evil, you stay away from him. Because he represents something which is repulsive. You don't want to be near him. So therefore, you don't have to distance yourself. Just don't get too close to him. Because his identity is obvious and irrefutable. That's what it is. But a bad neighbor, it's not so obvious. There's the subtleties of influence. And because the subtleties of negative influence, that's the reason why you have to keep your distance. That's the difference between a bad neighbor and a person who's truly evil. So the truly evil person, you're intimate with him, it'll affect your life. As much as you don't approve of his behavior, it does make a difference. But exposure will cause you to somehow acclimate yourself to that. But if you have a distance, you don't have to acclimate yourself. So as long as you're not attached to him, you're okay. But the bad neighbor, where it's not obvious who he is to you, it's not blatantly clear, you'll expose yourself to certain things which you shouldn't expose yourself. So therefore, by keeping your distance, that's a fence that you're not going to be exposed to something which is not appropriate behavior. That's the Shochan Ra. When we speak about evil, we spoke about this yesterday. It doesn't mean the person's intentionally evil. Let's say society is out of control. And the behavior is the antithesis of what spirituality is all about. You walk down the street, you see the way people, what they look, the way they behave, the way they talk. They don't know any better. They're all victims of the culture. They're all victims. But factually, if you go into that morass and you allow yourself to be exposed to that, and you have a daily dose of that, ultimately, you're going to see it less and less in the negative. Because a human being, for the sake of survival, we acclimate ourselves. And it comes very quickly to acclimation. As a result of that, so sometimes you go on the street or you live in a certain neighborhood and you say the way people walk, the way they talk, their body language. Ultimately, you say, well, there's nothing wrong with it. Initially, you're taken aback. It takes about 2-3 days, and all of a sudden, somehow you're able to make peace with it. It's not as I thought it would be. It's not as bad as I thought. But as time goes on, it's not as bad. You don't even have the word bad associated with that. It's not what I thought it was. These people are good people. They can't be blamed. We're not blaming it. It's not a question of blame. It's a question of what they represent. It's true they're victims, but if they represent something which is something you should not be, you got to stay away from it. You got to keep your distance from it. Otherwise, ultimately, you're going to become exactly like they are. Jews fled from Iran after the fall of the Shah. They had to flee, and the families paid these smugglers to take the people over the mountains through the Mitla Pass to get them eventually to Israel. There were times when they were there, they had to be in dens. They were opium dens. You know, you're not smoking opium, but if you're in a den where other people are smoking opium, you're gonna become an addict. Of course, we speak about secondhand smoke. So when you breathe in that opium, you become addicted. You're in an environment and you exposed to it. It seeps in. Whether you like it or not, it's just the reality. That's the Shochan Ra. That's the bad neighbor. See, the neighbor's not out to solicit you. He's not out. He's not a bad person, but he is what he is. And he's cordial and he's friendly. And because of that, you don't see him so negative because he's only bad. He's not evil. So therefore, you let your guard down. Once you let your guard down, you can be affected. The Russia, which he's so blatantly the antithesis of what you are and what you want to be, and you don't want to have that association, you don't have to keep your distance because you always have your guard up. You never let your guard down. What about if you have to work with that man? And you're involved with him day and night on a very close proximity level. Ultimately, it's like water. Water drips on a stone long enough, where does the stone thin? Identically, you're exposed close enough to this person, ultimately, he's going to have an effect on you. We find that Yosef was the most beautiful man who ever lived in the history of this world. There was no male human being that was ever had beauty like Yosef. And he was sold into slavery. And his master's name was Potiphar. And he had a wife who was also a beautiful woman. And she had her eye on Yosef. And she tried to seduce him that he should commit adultery with her, despite the fact that her husband had appointed Yosef to be the head of his household. And Yosef tried to avoid her in the worst way. And the Medrash tells us Every day, she would change her clothing multiple times every day to be more attractive. She would be right in his face that he couldn't even turn his head away. And when he turned his head away, she put him in a neck brace that he couldn't turn his head like a vise, that he had to look at her. And he couldn't even put his head down. So he closed his eyes, not to look at her. Because he understood, you look at her long enough, ultimately you're going to be drawn to her beauty. So she said to him, if you don't look at me, I will gouge out your eyes, that you won't be able to see at all. So he says to her, Hashem is pokech ivrim. You may take out my eyes, but God's the one who gives sight. I'm not concerned. Even if I have to lose my sight, I will not look at you. And every day, she didn't let up for a moment. So finally, he nearly succumbed to the temptation and had to flee. And he fled. When she finally grabbed him, she fled. And he knew if he wouldn't flee at that moment and he would hesitate, his desire will overtake him and he'd be there. And he'd violate the law of adultery. So he took every precaution. As much as he wanted to distance himself, she didn't let him. She didn't give him an inch. She was right in his face. So the Rasha himself, she's the one who created the chibur, the attachment. She didn't allow the distance. And as a result of that, if not for his last moment that he fled from her clutches, it would have been over. There's a Mishnah Pirkei Avos we're going to have later. If you consider three things, you will never come to the clutches of sin. The terminology used in the Mishnah is the clutches of sin. So the Maral of Prague asks, why do you say the clutches of sin? If you consider three things, you'll never come to sin. If you consider where you come from, where you're going before, who you're going to give a reckoning, you'll never sin. You'll never come to the clutches of sin. What's the clutches of sin? So he explains, very often, we justify many things which are not justifiable. As we say, when you get too close to the fire and you're not far enough away, you get burnt. So it's all based on your evaluation. Am I far enough? Am I not far enough? If you're at a distance and you're not in the clutches of sin, you're far enough. So if you consider these three things, understanding what it is, you keep your distance. You don't go near it. You will not come to the clutches of sin. Because once you're in the clutches of sin, to extricate yourself is not so simple. The example is, a person is on a tree branch, and he's on the tree branch right next to where it connects to the trunk. So if he feels slightly unsafe, he attaches himself to the tree trunk, which is greater level of stability. What happens? He goes out on a limb, as they say, goes to the end, and all of a sudden he feels the branch is giving way, or he starts to lose his balance. When you're out on a limb, it's not so easy that you can inch your way back to the trunk. That's called the clutches of sin. Once you're in the clutches of sin, to extricate yourself is not simple. So how do you come not to the clutches of sin? And you're far enough that you can pull out. You consider these three things, you always know you have to keep your distance. Understanding what the ramifications and the consequences of not considering these three things. So that's the clutches of sin. Al tischaber l'rosha. If you attach them, you're in the clutches of evil. Now the question is, will it affect you? It will affect you. And because you're in the clutches, once you get pulled in, you can't pull yourself out so quickly. You'll always justify it. It's not as terrible as you think it is, this and that, whatever it is. And ultimately, it's over. Because that person will cross lines, and once you cross those lines, it's not so easy to come back. Chaim was a very holy man. He was spiritually inspired, what we call Ruach HaKodesh. He was truly, and he knew when any time he would supplicate Hashem, Hashem would respond. If he gave a blessing to a person, which he didn't give to everyone, the blessing always took effect because he was a holy man. There's such a thing called a dibuk. What's a dibuk? A forlorn lost soul. A soul that God will not admit even to the world to come. It's not in this world, it's not in the world to come. It just floats around. A soul has to be in one or two places, either being in the process of being purged of its impurities, or in the world to come, in the soul world. But if it's in limbo, the soul suffers tremendously. So what does the soul, that forlorn soul, try to do? It tries to find a human being and goes into the body of that person. That's called a dibuk. So there was a young girl, 10 years old, who lived in Vilna, that this forlorn soul went into her. That's what happened. And the moment it went into her, it was obvious she was no longer that same person. First, a voice came out of her, which was not her voice. And this, whoever spoke from her innards, spoke about things which you could only know only if you're a spiritual being. You'd have all the occlusions of physicality, the blockages. And this person, this soul, spoke vulgarities that you could cringe when you heard it. And people were afraid to go near this girl. So they understood this girl was possessed with this soul. So it has to be excised from the girl. It has to be something extracted. How do you do it? So they took the soul to the Chofetz Chaim. They took the little girl to the Chofetz Chaim, this 10-year-old girl. And as they're transporting this girl, this foul language and all this bad stuff is coming out of the girl. And it's no one, a dibuk is in the person. The voice does not come from the mouth. The voice comes from the stomach. It's like somebody in the stomach is speaking like in a chamber. And speaking, okay? They come to the Chofetz Chaim. And the Chofetz Chaim being such a holy man, the moment that this girl with this forlorn soul was in her, he shut down, kept quiet. Because even that soul understood when you're in the presence of such a holy man, you must keep quiet. Okay? But the girl was possessed. She was not herself. So the Chofetz Chaim says to the soul, "Who are you?" Doesn't respond. Again, who are you? Doesn't respond. So Chofetz Chaim says, if you don't respond the next time, I will decree whatever he says will decree. I want you to identify yourself. Okay? He identifies himself. Who is he? He's an ex-yeshiva student who's learned in Telz in the 1800s with his, Telz was Lithuania or Latvia. And it was known in those days, if you wanted to make a fortune, the place to make the fortune was in South Africa. It was literally, it was the Ivory Coast. People were in the ivory business, in gold. All these raw materials were very valuable. So if you wanted to make a fortune in a short time period, you went there. So as a young man, 20 years old, he traveled to South Africa. He left the yeshiva and went to South Africa. You realize in those days, South Africa had no Jewish infrastructure. What did you have? You had the Boers and you had the natives, the blacks, which were treated like slaves. And he goes there and he realizes the way you're going to make money, it's ivory. So they would track herds of elephants and for days or weeks. And when they have them enough together, they kill all the elephants and they would take the ivory. They call them poachers. But in those days, it was legal. There were no government controls. And if you collected enough ivory, it was worth a fortune. So what's happening? He, with a number of these other people who he partnered with, are tracking a herd of elephants. And he's still observant. Observing Shabbos, keeping dietary laws to his best ability. And they're tracking this herd of elephants. And all of a sudden, another group of these people, they come and they want to steal the herd from them. Here they already spent weeks tracking this herd. And ultimately, they're going to soon come in for the kill. And all of a sudden, this other group comes, they want to steal the herd from them. So what happens? There's a gun battle. When did the gun battle take place? They were tracking it, and it was right before sundown Friday afternoon. And then the gun battle breaks out. So what does he do? Here he invested weeks of what? Of hard work, tracking this herd. Now these people want to steal it. So he went, and he was involved in this gun battle Friday night, and he killed some of these other people for the sake of the herd, which is considered a violation of Shabbos. Once you violate Shabbos at that level, afterwards you're not the same person. When you approach against Shabbos, Shabbos has been minimized. You created a lack of sensitivity for Shabbos. You're more easily able to violate Shabbos the second time. And ultimately, he became a Shabbos violator. Didn't keep Shabbos. And when you don't keep Shabbos, it goes from bad to worse. Eventually stopped eating kosher because he ate in the homes of his business associates. Look, if you killed already and you don't keep Shabbos, so how difficult it is now to eat non-kosher? It's not so difficult. He stopped eating kosher. And then afterwards, if you have no barriers keeping you away from whatever's out there, he was attracted to a black woman. Yeah? And he fathered children from this black woman. There's a man who was originally a yeshiva bachar, and he fathered children from this black woman. So he had not Jewish, he had children that weren't Jewish. Okay? Now he has a very successful businessman through the ivory. He's not going back to Lithuania because he realizes his past no longer is part of his life. And he's going down one of the rivers in Africa. And he's on this boat. And he's sitting on the railing of the boat. As he's traveling down the river, the boat gives a jolt. And he falls over the side of the boat. And he drowns. Okay? He drowns. And he dies. So the Chofetz Chaim says to this forlorn son, who was this person, when you fell over the railing and you were about to drown, did you say vidui? Did you confess? Did you do tshuva? Knowing that you did all this unacceptable behavior pattern, did you do tshuva for Shabbos, for kashrus, for fathering children from a non-Jewish woman? Did you do tshuva? Did you repent? Did you confess? He said to the Chofetz Chaim, it happened so quick, I didn't have a chance even to think about it. Immediately I died. He fell into the water so quickly, he drowned. That's the story. So the Chofetz Chaim made a deal with him. He said to him, if you leave this girl now, my kollel, which was comprised of very special Torah scholars, we will learn Mishnayos to moralize your soul for the next year. In addition, I will say Kaddish for you. On that condition, if you leave the girl, and if you don't leave the girl, your soul is going to the oblivion and there'll be nothing left of you. So he agreed. He left the girl. He left the girl. Immediately, the girl soon afterwards returned to her normal state. And he what? And he kept his word. They served Mishnah for him for a year, and they said Kaddish. How do we know the story? The Chofetz Chaim didn't tell about the story. Because when he excised the forlorn soul from this girl, it was the presence of the kollel. They had to say Kaddish. Kaddish has to be said within 10 people. It's a quorum. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zeichat Tzaddik Livracha, who was the closest student of the Chofetz Chaim, was part of that quorum. Every Purim, the Rabbi Chanan Wasserman would tell over the story with the Chofetz Chaim and the Dibuk. That's how it became public knowledge. Otherwise, nobody knew about it. So we say it's a slippery slope. Keep your distance from the bad neighbor. Don't attach yourself to the Russia. Why not? It's a generic relationship. It's a business relationship. Understand? You don't know where that relationship is going to take you. You see the man in every guise of behavior during a workday, how he interacts with you, how he talks, how he behaves. It will have a detrimental effect on you. Therefore, don't attach yourself. From a distance, you can be cordial, but to be intimate with him and where you're continuously involved with him, ultimately, it's going to take its what? It's going to take its toll. If you ever take a look at pictures of the 1800s, there were people that their vocation was chimney sweepers. You ever see pictures, chimney sweepers? They had like a long broom, narrow broom, and they wore like a hat with a point on it. And they were usually covered with soot from head to toe because they have to go into the chimney with this broom of theirs, and they would sweep out the soot from the chimney. So my mashgiach used to say, the chimney sweeper makes the chimney clean. What does he look like afterwards? He's covered with grime from head to toe. Person who goes into kiruv very often, unless you're really well weathered, to be unaffected, ultimately you are affected. And if you're affected, so here you're going to cleanse them and you become soiled. It's like the chimney sweeper. They have pictures of chimney sweepers in the 1800s. You see what they look like. They're holding their broom and you don't know if they're white or black. They're so covered with soot, the soot of the coal. Okay, I'm going to end it.